Welcome to Beethoven. Beethoven's single opera, Fidelio, has turned out to be a major success, but it was a long time coming. I think he probably struggled, or at least he felt like he did, as much as the characters in the opera struggled. It took him literally 3 attempts at it. You can read through my little summary here. Beethoven is not a composer to theater. His music is as dramatic as anyone's. But he had never had any experience in the theater, and it shows. Just because you can write great music and also music that has a sense of incredible drama, which no one denies that he does, doesn't mean that basic practical things about pacing and structuring drama and timing. He seems to be a little flat-footed, particularly in his first act, and apparently it was worse in the earlier version of the opera, which is now collectively known as Leonora, but I think it was still called Fidelio at the time. And a few years later he came back, revisited it, and revised it significantly, and that's the version that we have to this day. What remains from that early version, though, are 3 extra overtures. Apparently his overture, Beethoven, the overture was kind of a natural form of expression for Beethoven, and unfortunately he gave away the whole story in his first 3 attempts at overtures, so that the opera itself became kind of superfluous. But we'll get back to that a little later. So, unlike the Magic Flute, Beethoven's Fidelio is a true rescue opera. And this was a genre that was extremely popular at the time, particularly around the 20 years after the French Revolution. And there were rescue operas before that. Some of them were, in fact, comic. The rescue makes for a natural drama. It has suspense built into it. Mozart's Abduction from the Seraglio is a comic rescue opera. But after the French Revolution, composers and audiences were drawn to rescue operas that had political dimension to them for obvious reasons. And Beethoven, his favorite opera was Cherubini's Les Deux Journées from 1800. Beethoven, most of these operas were in French, at least originally, but they were also extremely popular in Germany. Beethoven's whole style that developed in the first decade of the 19th century, associated with especially his Third Symphony, also his Fifth Symphony, are called his heroic style. Fidelio is really the capstone to his heroic style, and that was influenced not only by Viennese classicism, Mozart and Haydn, but also by the French heroic tradition that developed after the Revolution, and that's particularly composers like Cherubini. So this is a significant influence on Beethoven's development as a composer and on the development of music in general, and as the Romantic Age is coming about. So a rescue opera is necessarily going to have 3 basic elements. One's going to be a dilemma or a challenge, someone that needs to be rescued. Then there'll be a suspenseful turning point, and then triumph, hopefully the end. The challenge here is that Florestan has been wrongfully imprisoned. Florestan's politics are vague, and it makes sense for composers during this age where politics are extremely, disturbingly fluid. It makes sense to be kind of vague upon on the principles that your hero actually espouses. In any event, he's a lover of freedom. That's about all that it says. But has been wrongfully imprisoned by his enemy, Don Pizarro, who's a tyrannical prison governor. Florestan, Leonora, his wife, is going to try to rescue him, and her plot is to disguise herself as a young man named Fidelio, who's apprenticing himself to the jailer, Rocco, and thereby get entry into the prison. So this whole first act has a comic subplot, or a kind of half-comic subplot. Rocco's daughter, Marcellina, falls in love with Fidelio. and her boyfriend, previous boyfriend Giacchino, is not very happy about it, as you can imagine, and neither is Fidelio, because of course he's liable to be uncovered. So this prompts a beautiful quartet called Mir ist so wunderbar. Now you can imagine Mozart writing such a quartet. He would divide up the four characters in terms of their emotional take on the situation. In this case, Marcellina and Rocco are happy because they imagine Marcellina getting married to Fidelio. Fidelio is, of course, freaked out, and Giacchino is too, frankly, for different reasons. But Beethoven does not divide them up into two groups. He has each character sing by themselves in an imitative counterpoint, very much like Rossini does later in Freddo ed Immobile. It's another slight problem with this, such a frozen moment early in the opera, is that there's been no real action or tension to build up to it. Nonetheless, it's absolutely gorgeous music, so it doesn't really need justification. Now, moving into the second act, the beginning of the second act is the low point in the opera, the darkest moment. We see Florestan for the first time. And he opens with a scene. The musical structure of this scene is very much like, say, Una Voce Poche Fa by Rossini. The content's profoundly different, but the musical structure is similar. You have an orchestral introduction, an accompanied recitative, and a cantabile. Then there's an acceleration at the end. It's not exactly a cabaletta. It's not really a separate aria, but it is an acceleration to a separate, a new section. And what drives that acceleration is a kind of a delirious vision Florestan has of his wife Leonora as an angel coming to rescue him. It's really stirring allegro. What is also profoundly different from the bel canto music of Rossini is the singing style that Beethoven's music requires. It takes the orchestra. It's not so much that the orchestra is bigger, it's that Beethoven uses the orchestra more, and it forces the singer to have to sing more heavily. And this is really a dramatic tenor role in a way that none of Rossini's music is. So the turning point comes in a later quartet. Now, this next scene, where the first act is a little ham-handed on Beethoven's part, here he really comes into his own. This is one of the most dramatically tense scenes of the early 19th century, and frankly of all opera. Don Pizarro he knows that the king's minister, Don Fernando, is arriving, suspicious that Don Pizarro has wrongfully imprisoned people and is using the prison to sort of settle personal scores. So he's on his way. So Don Pizarro feels he's got to kill Florestan in order to kind of suppress his evidence of wrongdoing. So he orders Rocco and Fidelio down to the dungeon to dig a grave. Now, Fidelio does not yet know that this prisoner is Florestan. So they make their way down, and Beethoven uses a style of text that you only have in German and French operas. It's called the monodrama, because only in non-Italian operas do you have spoken dialogue. So monodrama is spoken dialogue over instrumental accompaniment. So I discussed this a little bit in the lecture in the Italian unit on theatrical distance. Speaking is intimate. It's closer to the way the audience engages with itself. So when characters on stage speak, that lessens the distance. When you have music underneath, that's emotionally engaging. So this creates a really expressive musical style, even though the characters aren't singing at all. In fact, the fact that they aren't singing makes it even more immediate. It's very effective here. Um, what follows is a quartet. Don Pizarro comes down and confronts Florestan, pulls out a knife, and he's going to kill him right there. Fidelio, having nothing else, not knowing what to do, steps in front of him. Now, this, of course, is shocking because, as far as everyone else knows, Fidelio is just some boy, really. But then he says, if you're going to kill him, you have to first kill his wife. Everyone does a double take on that, because now she's revealed her true identity. At this, what follows is an incredible frozen moment that is only interrupted by a distant trumpet call. Don Fernando's approaching troops. So this incredible tension at this moment. Now, unfortunately, Beethoven, I think unfortunately, breaks it by having Aquino come in and explain what's happening as if we didn't know exactly what was happening. But in any event, it's really quite remarkable, and that, of course, brings about the resolution because Don Fernando's troops' arrival. It means that Don Pizarro is caught. Florestan is going to be released, and so is also the rest of the prisoners.